Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered the partial mobilization of roughly 300,000 reservists in Russia on Wednesday amid several setbacks in its invasion of Ukraine. In an address to the nation, Putin railed against NATO and Western allies for supplying Ukraine with military aid and vowed to use, quote, all means available in defending Russian efforts in Ukraine, alluding to nuclear threats. Here's some of his speech.
Защита нашей Родины, ее суверенитета и территориальной целостности. Для обеспечения безопасности нашего народа и людей на освобожденных территориях считаю необходимым поддержать предложение Министерства обороны и Генерального штаба о проведении в Российской Федерации частичной мобилизации. Повторю, речь идет именно о частичной мобилизации. То есть призыву на военную службу будут подлежать только граждане, которые в настоящий момент состоят в запасе. И прежде всего те, кто проходил службу в рядах вооруженных сил, имеет определенные военно-учетные специальности и соответствующий опыт. Призванные на военную службу перед отправкой в части в обязательном порядке будут проходить дополнительную военную подготовку с учетом опыта специальной военной операции. Указ о частичной мобилизации подписан. В соответствии с законодательством об этом официально письмами будут сегодня проинформированы Палата Федерального собрания, Совет Федерации и Государственная Дума. Мобилизационные мероприятия начнутся сегодня, с 21 сентября.
U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink, called it a, quote, sham referenda and mobilization, while another Ukrainian official responded by tweeting, life has a great sense of humor.
Well, there's nothing funny about this.
There's nothing funny about nuclear war, and this is kind of
conscription of 300,000 people.
Conscription, of course. This is where we started talking about this. 6-7 months ago, however long it's been at this point, with this threat of is this going to ultimately end or come up to the brink of nuclear conflict? And a lot of folks, I will say, poo-pooed it then and have poo-pooed it since, dismissing that as a kind of accelerationist, alarmist concern. And I think that they did that because if that's really on the table, if you really appreciate what it means to engage with a nuclear power like that, it makes the risks that have already been taken thus far in terms of engaging in this conflict seem that much more insane.
Right. I've never thought that it was alarmist to be concerned about the threat of nuclear war. Even if it's a thank you, even if it's a slight chance, nuclear war could mean the deaths of millions. It could mean the deaths of billions of people. Yeah. So it could mean our planet becoming inhospitable for 100 years. Yeah. So even if there's a like a 0.2% chance of it, you don't want to roll the dice even with those odds. We've seen with COVID that even a very small chance of death from COVID can still result in millions and millions of deaths. I mean, each individual has a very, even in higher age groups, at the beginning even had a very low likelihood of succumbing to the disease, but when confronted over and over and over and over again for the opportunity to roll those dice, eventually the thing happens. Yeah. So it's not, I don't think it was wrong to be fearful of that or to be more fearful of it now. I will say I think the Russian forces are discovering a lesson that our own forces have discovered, that many occupying forces discover, which is that it is easy to kill, to blow up buildings, to occupy, but then the other side can have guerrilla forces that resist, and even occupying, frankly, countries that seemed like they'd be easier to conquer, have gone horribly for the U.S. from Vietnam to Korea we destroyed every building in North Korea during the Korean War. But it didn't matter. We still couldn't win that war in any real sense, and that's what we found in the Middle East. And the Ukrainian resistance fighters have more going for them in many ways than those resistance forces. So I think Putin is learning a lesson that really he should have known all along, and is putting himself. I don't know that he's at risk of actually losing his power, but he's putting himself in a more perilous political position. Yeah. And he has had the effect of driving people to NATO, other countries. That if his goal was to short circuit NATO unity, it's totally failed.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on world leaders to forego neutrality while speaking with former U.S. President Bill Clinton at the revived Clinton Global Initiative event on Tuesday, saying, quote, "In this world, you cannot stand on the sidelines."
Meanwhile, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro renewed calls, for negotiations and ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, but denounced economic sanctions and isolation, saying in a speech at the UN General Assembly, the consequences of the conflict are already being felt in world prices for food, fuel, and other supplies. This impact puts us all against the goals of sustainable development. So this,
He's right.
this story about
totally
how
right.
members of the global South haven't been willing to jump on board this war train, have not been willing to come out of a kind of a neutral status with respect to this conflict. There was a South African official that said something similar, and there's been a lot of weird pressure from Europe and the West to get these people on board, and they're typical kind of types of arguments about, it's you somehow don't care about vulnerable people, you are, bigoted or racist or whatever it is for not wanting to be a part of whatever the cause is at any given time, fall flat when you are the global West, you are the global North, and you are making these claims at countries that are insecure, food insecure, that have less income, have less GDP, and who are basically saying, we don't want this to keep going because we're the ones that are going to take the first hit.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And this war has had horrible economic consequences for South America, for everyone in the whole world. It needs to come to an end. Now is the time, now is always the time for negotiations.
Yeah.
They should come to the table. The Russians should come to the table. Putin should have some face-saving measure and end this, because they're gonna, maybe they'll make more gains and then they'll eventually lose those. Like, they're gonna have to occupy this country for decades, which is what we found, which is what we discovered.
Yeah.
How many times do superpowers need to learn this lesson? You can kill people, you can take their land, but they fight back. They never give it up.
Yeah, and with respect to coming to the table, look, I love that Katie Halper, frequent guest of the show, she often says that these conflicts, in one way or the other, from negotiation, the question is are your actions getting us closer to a deal that both sides can agree on, or farther apart? And as we saw, we had another frequent guest on the show, Aaron Mate, spoke about this here about a month or so ago, that there was this reporting that there had been a deal much earlier in the process that the West had basically bungled, that they had intentionally thwarted and largely kept out of the public eye, because they want there to be a perception that they are not ever in any part responsible for this, or the unreasonable ones in the bargaining table here. And this isn't to say it's the West's fault per se, but at the end of the day, I think there needs to be a lot more transparency about what each side is actually asking for, instead of this constant breathless coverage about who's bombed whom.
Absolutely. This is a great moment for the Ukrainians, that they've taken back a large part of the country, and now is the time to end this war through diplomatic means. We should not be willing to fund this conflict, to supply weapons to it, without any accompanying understanding that they need to have a deal, one probably that results in Russia getting something, or else they're never going to give it up too, right. And we'll just have more people dying, Ukrainians and Russians. Yeah. These conscripted Russian soldiers, they have no idea, I presume most of them don't want to fight, but they have little understanding of what is even at stake. Most of us don't really understand what's at stake. What is at stake? Yeah. With war, you can't, win a war any more than you can an earthquake. It's just, it's harmful, it's killing people, and it needs to come to an end. We'll have more Rising right after this.